Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you guys are in the wine world. Welcome to the 21st edition of the release of Silicon Valley Bank's annual State of the Wine Industry Report. I'm Rob McMillan. I'm founder and executive vice president of Silicon Valley Bank's wine division. I'm hosting this august panel, and I'll get to their introductions in a second. Before I'd like to welcome all of you people that are attending out there. I can't see you, but I can hear you. But we have from all over the world right now. We have Argentina. I like this part. Argentina, Australia, Canada, Chile, France, Georgia, Ireland, Japan, Moldova, Mexico, Morocco, New Zealand, Russia, Switzerland, Spain, South Africa, the UK, and of course the US. And a bunch of regions, obviously, in the US. So I love the fact that everybody's tuning in. I'm sorry that it's during a pandemic. I would love personally to be in studio and sitting next to everybody and doing this. Maybe next year we'll get there, or perhaps maybe the direct consumer video cast that'll go in May. That'd be another nice thing. A couple of things before we get started. To turn on the closed captioning feature, please click the live transcript button on the below Zoom bar. Feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function. That'll allow for anonymous questions and submissions if you'd like. And we will send a link of the recording after the webinar. Now with introductions of my panel. Start with Amy. She's not here. Sadly, she had a family emergency that came up, and so she was unable to attend. She extends her condolences, probably not condolences, but there's a better word for that. Regrets, there we go, to everybody here that she's not there. But we do have, today we have Danny Brager. I call him the Dean of Data. We have Paul Mabray, the Doctor of Digital. And we have replacing Amy coming off the bench at the last minute last night. Dale Stratton is the master of something. I don't know what you're the master of, but the master of everything, I guess. I am going to start with just a couple of slides, and Heidi, you can pull up slide 7 if you don't mind, and just talk through just the top line stuff from the survey and all the research that we've done. So the slide you have in front of you is from our PGA database that it extends over 20 years. PGA is a peer group analysis, and it's financial statements of prospects, clients, public companies, etc. And from that we get good data that we can bring to our customers and do peer group analysis, so we can show them how they benchmark against others. So this is just one of the data points, and what you can see in this slide is that way back in 2000 we had a growth rate of 28%, and it's come down over the years. I like this slide in particular because it shows what's happened during recessionary periods. So you can see what happened in the tech bubble. We had this is always like a train stopping in the desert going chunk, 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 and when you have any kind of a shock in demand, then it also it's all stacked up. It's a little bit like some of the port issues we're having right now, and then it starts to unwind at a different point, because wine is recession resistant. People like wine, they keep drinking it, so that unwinds itself, and that's pretty typical. So you can see in the tech bubble what happened. Went down to 5.2% growth, and then way up to 25%, and then look, the Great Recession. We actually went negative for a short period of time. I hadn't seen that before. And then, going into 2020, we went to minus 0.6% in sales growth. And then, this year we just rocketed up to 21%. Now, this isn't by volume. This is by by the number of wineries. So it's averaged by winery, not by volume. So that volume would be dominated by the top 25, and they would have very different numbers than what you're seeing. We use this for benchmarking. So for the vast majority of the industry out there, when you see these kind of slides, what we're talking about is, it's something for you. It's closer to what you do than looking at the, the massive amounts of wine that are sold in the industry. So it's, like I said, quite different. And I think, you have to say, when you look at 2020 was, in my opinion, the most difficult year since Prohibition for the wine industry as a whole. You had to be in the right channels to succeed, and if you were, you had awesome results, or potentially awesome results. If you weren't, maybe not. But this year has been a year of if we had this channel shifting in 2020, we have channel unshifting. I'm still looking for a better word for that. It's not very good. It's not very good grammar or diction either. So there's got to be a better word, but that's what we've dealt with this year. So it kind of looks like this slide in front of you. It's the minus 0.6% to the 21%, and we'll see some other slides that show how the channels unwound. It makes it incredibly difficult as analysts to try to sort this out, because we're used to using, as an example, Nielsen or IRI as an indicator of what's happening with the industry as a whole. We can look at price points, and as long as we don't have channel shifting, we can use the scan data as a proxy. We start to move away from that, you're having to grab at disparate pieces of information. This last year, it's been made even more difficult because John Marco uses, as an example, government reporting, and a lot of the government was working from home too. So over the last 2 years, and so they've been late in delivering some of the tax reporting that John depends on for his analysis. And by the way, he's come out with some really good analysis yesterday. I hope you guys saw that. Shanken came out with some reporting today. I hope you guys saw that. Both good reviews of what happened in the industry. But just focusing, if we could go to slide 6, Heidi, just keeping the spotlight on the premium industry. 53% of wineries said 2021 was a very good year. So when you look to the right, the 29%, almost 30% of wineries said this was their best year ever. That's remarkable to me, because think of the challenges that we've had to deal with: supply chain, pandemic, labor. The reopening, closing, closed restaurants. The challenges have just been daunting, and it's been so awesome to see how the industry has reacted to these challenges, made quick changes, and in many cases have prospered from it. We have some permanent changes that we'll talk about in the consumer behavior a little bit later. But it's awesome to see that, and you're going to see this in a lot of the slides. So 29% this year, they said it's their best year in history. If you go back to last year, it was only 13%, and so these trend lines that you're seeing here in front of you, they're kind of showing that. So last year it was all tilted toward more of a disappointing year, one of our most challenging. 32% said it was one of our most challenging years in 2020. And now we're back to the opposite. We're 30% that's saying it's their best year ever. Now, when you look at that, you say, well, they're just comparing it to one of their most difficult years ever. But no, they're saying in their history, this is their best year ever, and that's just remarkable. So I think that's a good jumping off spot, and maybe a good place to bring in our other panelists, and let's just kick off the discussion. Paul, I think you might have a point of view regarding what's happened with like internet sales or something like that.
Something like that. Well, I think that, last year we talked about one of the greatest outcomes of this pandemic was the adaptability of the wineries and the resilience at change that's coming that hadn't been there before. And I think you're seeing that kind of manifest this year as they invest in digital, new wine club methodologies, DTC, even channel understanding is a whole new horizon for them. The growth in our maturity as an industry is explosive over the last 2 years, not just as it relates to digital, which has been unbelievably challenging for them to learn in a short amount of time, the whiplash, but everything. I think that we're seeing a whole level of sophistication around employee training, e-wholesale, marketing, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Heidi, let's bring up slide 11 while Paul talks, if we can.
Yeah.
It's a good slide.
Yeah, this tells a very good story as well. I think that, and Dale mentioned this earlier, the genie's out of the bottle for everybody, whether it's a small winery or a big winery going into online sales. It's not just on the winery side, it's on the consumer side. The behaviors of buying online have always been there for the consumers. They're just really adapted to alcohol and especially wine over the last 2 years. And I don't think you're going to be able to put that in. And it's going to increase not only because of the consumer demand, but the investments coming from wineries and vendors to make it easier, better, faster.
Yep. Yeah, and I like this slide because it just shows the resiliency of the internet channel. So, last year when we were looking at this, we went from something, in the premium winery segment, we went from something like, 1.5% or 1% of sales on average for the average winery. We went from that as their sales to 10%, in just no time at all. And at that point, what I think both Paul and I thought was that what we were dealing with was consumers that were finding the producers. You had a shopping cart, you had a place where you could be contacted, and a lot of consumers were flooding into the grocery stores in 2020 to buy stuff, including toilet paper, as we discovered. That was the one of the parlor questions that you can bring up at a party. What's how are wine and toilet paper linked? Well, in 2020 they were both hoarded. And at a point, not very long after the lockdowns, we saw internet sales just really take off for producers, and it was and that was really kind of a nationwide thing that we saw with a lot of companies, a lot of retail. Obviously, internet just became a big thing because you were shut at home, and when Paul and I talked about this one specific thing last year, he said, "I think this is just going to go up," and it's one of the times where I was partially wrong. Let's just say partially wrong, because I thought what we'd see is internet sales drop back a little bit as we kind of renormalized, if you will, and we had reopening and the channels unshifted, as I say, and we didn't really have that. We had those sales remain consistent and a viable channel, and it's a very different thing when you go from a channel that's 1.5% of sales to one that is now 10% of sales. When it gets to 10% of sales, and think about the overhead that you're putting into that. You don't have to put your tasting room into that. The amount of staffing is a lot less in a staffing impacted era that we're now dealing with. That's quite appealing. And so the investments now in digital become much more important. And I think that's what we're seeing. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I think the indicator that you could see from your DTC report you did is the frequency of emails that people are sending to consumers and how that's increased over time. And it was always available there, the way they're actually able to extract more value from their customers. The hardest role to fill in the wine industry right now is an e-commerce leader, right? It's the hardest, it's the most in demand. There's not a single wine that's not trying to find an expert. And there's very few true winery experts. I think you could arguably say Justin Nolan from Treasury is probably at the top of the heap there. Constellation has John Troutman, but there's maybe 5 or 6 really stellar stars that are just experts. So it's hard to fill the role.
Yeah, and just to show how far we've come. Back in, I think it was 2016 or 17, maybe a little bit before, in my blog, I wrote a piece called "What's the Hardest Job to Fill in the wine business?" And it was actually, back then, it was finding somebody that was actually managing the direct to consumer, not somebody that you just took out of your tasting room, but somebody that had, more diverse sets of skills that could, manage clubs and use the, data to manage that, use the digital, understand the digital side and manage that. So, a much more inclusive set of skills that was needed. And we really couldn't find those kind of people. And now we're starting to talk about a subset of that. And now we can't find those people. So that's all part of the growth and change. And we have to be really happy about that, I think, as an institution, excuse me.
Rob, I was just going to add a couple of things if I could.
Please, yeah.
Based on, the discussion. I mean, COVID just accelerated a trend that was, had started, but it just, and I think other people have said this, not just me, but put it on steroids. And to some extent, like, people found out things that they almost didn't know before. They might not have known they could buy alcohol online. So if I look at the growth of e-commerce for wine, and lay on top of that the growth in the number of people buying online, they go hand in hand. And even though 2021 may not have been as large in total as it was in 2020 for wine in the e-commerce sphere, when I looked at the numbers, it's still like 2.5 times bigger than it was in 2019. And that's just, a trend that's not going to reverse. It will continue. And the other thing that I was going to add is, from a competitive perspective, across the alcohol space, wine has about 2/3 of the e-commerce dollars across beer, wines, and spirits. So that's an area that, is a strength for wine that we want to protect and, defend, and grow.
Yeah. And Danny, since we're on you, maybe Dale, you can chime in here too. Heidi, let's bring up slide 9 for a second.
Robin, as we go to that slide, I do think also to think about this in terms of the consumer is an omni consumer. They didn't turn off buying wine in other channels. They added buying wine online. They are still buying wine via traditional 3-tier channels. They're still going out, having on-premise. And then even when you think about e-commerce is a very, very broad channel. There are many ways in which that channel manifests itself. People do buy direct from wineries. They're buying from Drizzly. They're buying in many, many other channels. And to Paul's point, the skill set to do that correctly is very broad. It can't be as narrow as just thinking about your e-commerce business or what you're doing from your own internal website. It's really broad, and outreach is important.
And also, to follow that, the standards aren't set by the wine industry. They're set by companies like Amazon, Uber Eats, DoorDash. They're set that we have a much higher standard that we're following, trying to keep up with. And how do we do that in a smart, efficient, effective way?
Yeah, this is the slide that you guys have in front of you. This is what happened between 2020 and 2021. And in some ways, when I look at 2020, and you look at tasting room and went from 27.4 to 28.6, isn't that remarkable to see that as a percentage of sale, the average winery went from 27.4 to 28.6, and this is with closed tasting rooms for a part of the year. But it shows what kind of was happening in the background, with regions starting to allow outside tastings more. There was a lot of effort that was going into trying to, get wineries, small wineries in particular, the opportunity to bring in customers still. And So we ended up with outside at a point. We had outside and inside tastings when we started to reopen a bit. That was really helpful. And I think one of the other things that really came into play with this was, as I talked to the wineries, is the average check went up. And the average check went up because we went away from, we went to by appointment, mandated, which I think a lot of folks were a little bit nervous about trying to go to that. I think our metric has been for too long, how many people came into my tasting room. But, it's not the right metric. The metric is how many buyers came into your tasting room. What's the average check? And the average check has gone up. Now, part of that average check, I think, has to do with a temporary thing, right? Looking at this past year, we ended up with a period of time where savings rates for consumers was at an all-time high. People with discretionary income had nowhere to spend it. They weren't traveling for a period of time. Restaurants were in a difficult spot, and you didn't go to. I mean, you really had very little to do. You can go to sporting events, and we did have wineries as an option. So I think wineries benefited a lot from that. So I think that's kind of the hidden message in between those two periods. But you can see here exactly what happened, as I was talking about before. Online, it's the kind of pinkish thing on the far left, 9.8, and it dropped to 9.1. Not much of a drop. Let's call it even. Wholesale on-premise in 2020, 10.8. So we did have some wholesale on-premise sales. We did start to open up in different parts of the year, and that increased to 19.2%. So the on-premise for the premium wine segment actually did pretty well this last year. We're going to show you some things that kind of may seem like that contradicts it in a minute, but this is a good thing when you see this kind of change. And then wholesale off-premise, it dropped a little bit. It's not surprising. It's part of that channel shifting.
Rob,
yeah.
if we were to look at this chart for 2019, would it look similar to 2021, right? And early when you were doing your intro, you talked about data's jumping right now, and it's very, very difficult when you start looking at just last year and only trying to compare 1 year to 1 year, probably not telling the full story in that the entire supply chain and everything took a jolt. And as I look at using SIP source data, 3-tier data that is out there, and we'll look at some slides from that. But this is when you go back to February of 2020, on-premise in that data set accounted for 14.1% of all depletions, not of dollars, but of volume. And as we see
that's through wholesale.
That's through wholesale, 3-tier wholesale in the on-premise. And now it's down to 10.7. So, you've had and even that's a 12-month rolling. When I look at a 3-month rolling, it's only 10.8. So we're going to level out there somewhere, probably where that on-premise is going to lose about 20 to 25% of its wine volume. And that is a channel that still has some uphill struggles. And we know that about 10% of on-premise accounts that were open in February of 2020 have closed. And we certainly suspect that they're carrying fewer products. They've limited their range and are watching inventory much, much closer. So the on-premise, to me, and a lot of the people on this call certainly do rely on the on-premise for their revenue. It's going to continue to be a difficult channel for certainly the short, probably the medium term, and even potentially the long term.
And to add on to what Dale, what you were saying, that drop in the number of counts, in the number of accounts that may have almost permanently closed, is even higher in the fine dining channel. And that fine dining channel, that's a wine-centric channel. So part of that's just gone now. And the other, I love, Dale, when you said, another good comparison would be versus 2019. And I took a look at Rob's report from last year. And in 2019, the wholesale channel, both off and on, was about 34, like a third of the business. And now it's, for the last 2 years, it's been less than 30%. So there's definitely been an overall shift from wholesale into some of these other channels.
And this chart's a little bit deceiving, is it's just showing the mix of sales versus that this pie has grown in general. So I think that people are saying, wow, there's slow growth of, this is a percent of their total sales. It's not 9%. They've grown more e-commerce. So it's a little deceiving that they've been able to maintain that percentage even as the sales of the total mix grows, right? Is a better way to explain it, Rob.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Paul, because from 20 to 21, this group grew 21% in top line, right? So even though, if you want to look at it, online went from 9.8 to 9.1, probably in total dollars. I don't want to do the math in my head; that would be a mistake. But in total dollars, it almost for sure is higher by quite a bit than it was in 2020.
When I listened, Rob, like to your comments, I almost feel like 2020 was this great year of learning about like what really maybe wasn't even working before, and people stopped doing it, and all the new things that people had to learn how to be successful, and then a lot of that learning was applied in 2021, and you end up with some of these great results that you described. So I think it's great credit to the industry, but you got to learn, adjust, and apply. Yeah.
And I'll be curious when we do the direct to consumer survey in March, how it turns out. But as everybody is aware, I've been saying for years that we needed to take the experience of the tasting room on the road. I was suggesting that we needed to broaden our channels. We were over dependent on a certain channel, vis-a-vis tasting room. People come into the tasting room, we sell them club. We work on the lifetime value of the club member, and that's the way we think about it as a smaller winery. And yet that over dependence really got tested when we started shutting the tasting rooms down. And we went to Zoom, and thank God for Zoom. As we're talking, over a Zoom venue right now, a lot of things would have been very different had we not had this technology that was here at the right time. But it allowed people to take the experience on the road, and they got to experiment. They had to experiment now with some of this stuff, and I'll be curious to see where it falls out. I do believe that the amount of Zoom traffic that's out there has dropped, but I don't think it's gone away. I think that's another component of continuing digital engagement that's now going to become part of the sales stack for probably all wineries in some form or fashion.
I would fathom to guess, Rob, that the wineries, and as I've seen, they're reevaluating all of these different things. How does our wine club work? What's our tasting room experience supposed to be like? What is the total customer experience in general? How do we do calls and mailings? I think you're seeing we're still in the midst of that. To Danny's point, we started the learning in 2020. We're continuing that evolution of learning and adjustment into 2021. And I think you're going to really see it in 2022 manifest the maturity and see that growth in these DTC channels in a significant way.
Yeah. Let's go back to that one slide. I think it was slide 11, Heidi. I don't know if did we put this one up yet?
Yeah.
I think we did. Look at the far right. If you want to see who's getting into e-commerce, what's driving e-commerce growth right now, it's actually larger wineries, not smaller. Smaller has by percentages of their own channels, they have a larger dependence on e-commerce, but the investments being made in direct sales by larger companies now too.
For sure.
Rob, if I even extend that out to if I look at the super large, like the over 500,000, I was looking at some SOFO ship compliant and Wines Analytics data through the end of the year, and large wineries, those over 500,000 cases of the year, are about almost a fifth of the volume now. Wow. And they're about 13%, like just back in 2019. So they're, to Paul's point, everyone's getting into it. It's not just the small wineries looking at this channel as an opportunity to sell more to consumers.
Yeah, and talk a second, Danny, about a direct consumer, total direct consumer as part of the full channel, because you look at the data from Wines Vines Analytics, who's got the best data around for that channel, I think. Talk about that.
Yeah, if I look at shipments, so the ship compliance, Sova ship compliance numbers, it works together with Wines Vines Analytics. We just got the year-end numbers, and shipments direct to consumer. It was a record year. It was 8.5 million cases in total, and $4.2 billion moving through the DTC shipment channel, which is a remarkable number. And one of the reasons I think it's remarkable, it was ahead of last year. And when I think about last year was a super high number because tasting rooms were closed or shuttered, part of the year at least. So you know that the tasting rooms would be on top of all those record high numbers that I talked about. So it just was an amazing year for this particular channel.
Yeah.
There was a couple months where there was over 1 million cases shipped in a couple individual months.
Yeah.
Huge
Yeah.
numbers.
Danny, and I think what's interesting, and all of us talk about the past a lot and probably don't think about the future enough. I would certainly predict that next year will be bigger. It'll set another record, right? That this thing is going to continue to grow. It's not going to grow in that double digit, but certainly low single digit growth off what is now a big base is meaningful to this category.
Yeah, and that's just, I think, Dale, you said this before, from a consumer perspective, like direct to consumer, shipments, they order something, it comes to them. But then on top of that, you've got, the pure play e-tail, a pure play e-tailer like a wine.com. You've got the Drizzlies and mini bars and reserve bars. You've got every brick and mortar retailer with an online portal that people can order through, or most. So there's like just e-commerce in general, there's lots of ways that consumer can get something in a convenient way. They don't have to physically go to someplace to buy something. And, whether it's COVID or just for convenience reasons, that satisfies a consumer want and need.
Well, you should chip in here because this is your bailiwick really is talk about the apps that are out here and what's happening with investment in apps and the change in that universe. It's remarkable change.
Yeah, I think you can see the growth. I think the whole e-wholesale division that was led by the large enterprise level wineries is really an emerging channel. And to Danny's point, supporting things like Drizzly, Reserve Bar, Picks, Vivino is a core part of their business going forward. And in fact, even the wholesalers have gotten the business. Southern Wine and Spirits recently launched Dram, which is their digital agency to help stimulate consumer sales online. I think that's a pretty telling story about where the world is going when Southern puts such a hard effort against it. I think Dale can probably speak more to that, but RDC has the same activities going on. It's an exciting time for online. I mean, it's been a dormant part of our business for 2 decades. We're the last industry to get there. And it's almost like it's a gold rush in some ways. And it's going to be exciting to see how we adapt going forward.
Yeah, it's a gold rush. It's although the whole thing about distribution and direct is kind of gated, if you will, by the product itself, right? It is heavy. It's bottles and glass, and it's heavy, and so trying to get it out there is difficult. Let's go kind of switch gears a little bit and talk in more broad terms of the industry. Let's go to slide 27, Heidi. And talk about really the elephant in the room. So this is well, Dale, you should do this a sip source. So you're the sip source guy. So sip away.
You bet. And so this is looking at the volume, and the bars represent volume represented on share, the left axis, and then the dots are representing the growth trend. And these are 12-month rolling numbers. And really what we see here is just what has happened with the wine category. And it's been progressing this way for a while. but it has really solidified itself here where everything under $11 is in decline. Bad news is that that's 75% of the total wine volume. And so in total, that area, these are numbers through November. And looking at December numbers, they have remained very consistent with this. So we see good growth in the high end, and we're getting at every price point. However, if we were to go back 2 years, that $8 to $11 was growing. And that $11 to $15 range, that was growing double digits. So we're seeing this continuous move upward and this premiumization. And while that's a really good thing, it's great that we're premiumizing. At some point in time, that well's going to run dry. And if you think about it, there's really only two ways for you to grow your business. One of it is to get more people purchasing your product. Or number two is to get those that are purchasing your product to spend more dollars on your product. And right now, if we were to look at the wine category versus beer and spirits, we're as a category not doing as good of a job of bringing in new consumers. We're relying more on current consumers to spend more dollars. And I certainly think when you look at travel limitations and everything that happened with COVID, high earners had disposable income. And Rob, you can probably speak about this more from an economic standpoint, but there was more disposable income. So that trade up has been natural, and it's gone, I think, to an extreme, but it's going to become more and more difficult in the out years to continue to grow purely by relying on the same people to spend more dollars.
Especially when those people tend to be older, which is a concern. But I've never, every time I look at this, I remind myself that I've never seen this over my 20 plus years of looking at it, where there's such a disparity between the two ends, which is
as an industry. Yeah, as an industry. Yeah. The premium wine is doing fine. By the way, I'm curious what you guys think about premiumization, the term, because as an industry, we're somewhere around 0% growth rate. Depends upon how you look at it, and the analysts that are out there will have different points of view, but they're going to hover around zero. So can you have premiumization when you have, as an industry, no growth? How do we define premiumization? I used to define it as growth in volume, growth in sales at the same time. I don't know if we can say that anymore. I mean,
there's definitely different ways of looking at it, but I keep thinking that premiumization is good, except when it's at the exclusion of like this double-digit decline at the lower end. Like that's what I'd love to see, is the numbers on the right-hand side and a bit of growth, or not the extremes of the declines that we see on the left-hand side. That's when I think premiumization is good. I don't like this picture particularly.
Okay, so Danny, should we all jump under the $50 plus thing because it's got 35% growth?
Well, the other thing, I mean, you just look at like the amount of volume there, right? I mean, growth is good, but growth is just a percentage. It's the actual dollars, the actual volume that counts. And there's a lot of people chasing those numbers on the right-hand side, a lot of wineries.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Well, I was going to ask, someone asked a question that leads into overall market share. That'd probably be a good opening to, like, are we growing or not in general,
Yeah. Why don't we let's go to the big slide for me. This is the one in the front part of the report where I said, it's the one slide you should get to know. It's slide 26. To me, this is the most descriptive slide to talk about the industry that you can find. But the last one we saw, it was the lower price point wines, and that flood, if you want to talk about it that way, has been kind of going up. Here's the industry here. Here's premium. Here's higher production wines down here, and that flood has been going up in price point. And so we have, a smaller amount of people. We have a smaller amount of space that we can actually, be in now in terms of from a dollar standpoint. And I said this earlier, but being an analyst has been really hard the last couple of years because channel shifting and unshifting. It's just become very difficult to do this. But if there's one slide that's important to understand about this year, the last couple of years, it's this one. And again, it's a SIPSource slide, but SIPSource is the only place where you can take out the noise from that channel shifting. Nielsen's got, a great thing with off-premise. They have some, Nielsen CGA has got some on-premise stuff, but it's not combined and comparative. But this data, these data set are. Dale, why don't you talk about how this data set comes together? It's probably worthwhile talking about that.
You bet. So this data is represented by, and I think we currently have 16 wholesalers who are aggregating their volume data. So their depletion data is being aggregated, and the biggest three wholesalers are in there. There's a number of them that are regional. You can go to sipsource.com and see the wholesalers that are included in this. But net of it is it's cast a very, very broad net in capturing three-tier business. And it's reporting on spirits and on the wine category. And when that top line is spirits growth, and spirits have been on a very good growth trajectory for a while. And pre-pandemic, we saw this divergence happening where spirits were growing, wine was continuing to decline. The early days of the pandemic, actually, we saw that reverse, and those trends started operating together, and they did operate together. And you can see over there, September through February, they were moving in conjunction. Now, not great for wine because it's below spirits on a growth rate, but now here we come, and in February of 2021, March. Now we've started to see that them separate from each other and go in different directions. And so as we look at this, and this was especially acute when on-premise reopened, and we definitely saw owners of on-premise establishments restocking spirits before they restocked wine. Now, some of that could be that just what was on hand, that you had a wine cellar, you had some wine on hand, but now that we've gone up here and you're realistically coming up on 2 years since that event, that inventory has to be gone. And now you're really seeing, I think, on-premise operators move with what the consumer demand is and managing that cash flow. That industry is under severe pressure from every angle. And so I think they're managing their inventory closer. As we look at, and we just got December data in yesterday, and for the 3 months, the spirits category had a great December. They're up 5.1% in that 3-month period. Wine came back a little bit. It's down 7 now, but those are still really disturbing numbers. And per the previous slide, the biggest driver of that is the below $10, below $11 area that is driving most of those losses. But it's difficult to see growth in the wine category if we don't turn that bottom end around a little bit and start getting some new consumers in at that bottom end back into the category and bring new consumers in.
Yeah, this was the one of the places I was wrong last year. Everybody that reads my report realizes that I make predictions, and then I go and I confess where where I hit it, where I didn't. And this is one of the places I didn't. People last year, they were talking about a party. They were talking about the Roaring 20s, how 2021 was going to be. It's going to be like the Roaring 20s. People were going to party. And I bought off on that. The data, we don't have any consumption data from the 20s because it's prohibition. And so I chose to look post World War II at the data, and we do have wine sales data from from that era. And it's really obvious when World War II ended and people started coming home. There was a party that happened, and we saw wine kind of explode. Much like you see in coming back from some of these dips. As a matter of fact, we drank so much of wine coming out of that the next year we went down because we ran out of the wine to sell back then. So that's what I expected. I expected that we were going to, with this big tailwind as an industry, that we would take off. And the fact that we went negative by volume with that tailwind, that's the part that's disturbing to me. And where is most of this coming from? It's coming from on premise. It's coming from the restaurants. Again, Schenken came out with a little bit of a report today, and this is kind of one of the things that they focus on too. They're seeing the same thing that we're seeing. Hey, why don't we go to slide 28 for a second, and let's drill down into restaurants for a second, because I did spend some time talking about this in the report. What's happening with restaurants? How has it gotten that? Wine used to own meals. It was wine and food. And how did we actually get to this part now where you have a beverage list? You don't have a wine list in large part anymore. In the fine wine restaurants, you do, obviously the high end, you do, still catering to a wealthy older consumer largely. And so that is where the demand you saw from those pie charts. That's why the premium side of the business has done so well, because that even though the smaller white tablecloth restaurants got impacted more than chains. Chains could raise cash in the markets, and the small ones couldn't. The ones that got through needed to restock, and this is what they do. It's wine and food. It all goes together. And so the premium side, did fine. But here is one of the problems that we face, and I found this this slide from the government and digging through files, and I really wanted to replicate it out. The look at the rest of the data out through the present, but they computed an index, and I couldn't back into it or quite figure it out. And I asked the government to respond, but as you would suspect, they didn't answer their phone. But this is I think indicative of the way I feel the industry has gone. In the on premise. The blue line is wine from grocery. This is looking at it through the consumer end, and the red part is wine at bars and restaurants. And you can see that they kind of trended together up until about 2009. And, that was, just after the Great Recession. And the on-premise started finding it very difficult on the whole to raise prices much. Now, I don't know what's happened after this ends in 2015. But I remember a time where you walked into a restaurant and you got a good glass of wine for $4, $5, $6, and it wasn't that long ago. But here you can see this is showing what's happened with the growth in wine at the bars and restaurants. It's gone up precipitously. So it's an issue because we used to have wine by the glass as being one of what I call on-ramps for consumers. It used to be a place where consumers could come and they could try something. If they didn't go to their favorite winery's tasting room, they could try something. The Buy the Glass program became very important for the last 20 years, really, for a lot of wineries. And yet the price of a glass of wine has gone up dramatically. Danny, I think you had you had a slide that you were sharing last night about, I think it was your slide, about the price of wine by the glass in one restaurant. Well, I won't name the restaurant, but do you remember some of the?
I think it might have been Paul, but I was going to say that I think COVID and the pandemic just accelerated the consumer understanding of like prices in different places. And, you know, they're even more aware now than they might have been before about how much they're being asked to pay at a restaurant or a bar compared to buying that same, you know, product in a grocery store or in some other place, or even ordering it online. There's also the cocktail list that people can order from, and for, you know, $15, so $35 might have been extreme, but for $15 they can order some, you know, fancy, cool, maybe interesting cocktail. And, you know, I think to some extent that's what we're seeing, because spirits are growing that much faster.
We used to, you know, and I think everybody can recognize this. You know, we used to walk into a restaurant and we'd get the wine list and have these, you know, very long lists of different wines that you could try, you know, by the bottle, and, you know, you're happy that they curated it, and you could depend on, you know, the stuff in the restaurant being good. So it's just kind of picking price if you're looking at bottles. You know, now just this is part of the issue, is that the price of wine in restaurants has just gone up so dramatically. And let me throw one other piece into that. Large chains now, you know, they go to the producer and they say, you know what, here's what we need to sell by the glass. It needs to fit into this price point. It can't fit into this price point. And so the answer is, okay, well, I'll make something for you. And so you go out and you put different components of other things that are lower priced to make your margin. So what do we end up with? We end up with a wine that is, you know, wine is all good now. So it's not about that, but you know, you make a little bit lower quality wine to get the price in. And so what happens with the consumer? Now that's your on-ramp now. Your on-ramp, you know, at least through the restaurant, you're sharing a wine that maybe isn't representative of the brand that you'd like to put forward, just so it fits in that price. And so, you know, today we have beverage lists. We have, you know, it's a third wine and much smaller lists, and then a third, you know, beer and a third spirits. And I shouldn't say beer, because really it's beer and other, right? You know, Danny's got a much better memory of the stuff that goes into the other, but it's like kombucha. What else, Danny, is in that list of other?
Hard teas, hard seltzers, non-alcoholic beer. I mean, it's a long list. And if we get a chance, Rob, I can some of the numbers from those other things are huge. I mean, they're just monstrous. And, you know, consumers are buying those other things, and they're comparing prices of those other things to a bottle of wine. Yeah.
Let's deviate for a second and talk about the consumer. So, Danny, what's the spiked seltzer category now in terms of dollars?
North of 5 billion. And that's the malt-based side of things. So that's the White Claws and the Trulies of the world. But that's north of 5 billion. Then you add on another billion plus from the spirit cocktails, which includes like the spirit seltzers, but also spirit ready to drink cocktails. And you've also got, you know, to credit to the wine industry, you've got wine cocktails and spritzers and stuff, which is another billion. But those categories that are billions and billions and billions now were really small 3, 4, 5 years ago. And given that total alcohol spending isn't up all that much, certainly on a volume basis, probably isn't up much at all, people are making trade-off choices, occasion by occasion by occasion. So it's a battle for each occasion to, you know, have wine having more mind share and more actual purchase share. It's a battle.
Yeah. And you know, I just have been reading recently about spiked soda, you know, Mountain Dew. What was the other one? It wasn't Dr. Pepper. It was
kombucha.
No, I was trying to think the other soda that's going to go spike now. One was Mountain Dew.
Yeah. And Constellation just paired up.
Fresca is the
Fresca.
second one. That was
Yep.
the other one I was trying to remember. So, I think that's likely to be a distraction as well. And so we have that other category now in the restaurant. And if you think that wine is going to be able to hold on to the food and the wine pairing thing, I think you're wrong. I think it'll take a long time to get to have that move away entirely, but it's being eaten into already. And why do we have a third right now on these beverage lists? Well, it's because of consumer demand. And because we look at value, it's the price that's on the menu. It's the what people prefer. Wine is kind of a difficult thing to understand at times. Let's go to 32, Heidi. Let's look at slide 32. I think it's a pretty good slide. Dale, Danny, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I can. Dale, sorry, did you want to?
No, I want you to go, Danny.
Okay, yeah. I mean, when Dale was talking even before, when you showed that spirits versus wine line and they were diverging, I mean, the overlay to that is that a wine drinker is largely not an exclusive wine drinker. In fact, this says that the exclusive wine drinker is only 14% of households, and they only account for 4% of wine volume. So, and Dale's president of Wine Market Council, and Wine Market Council data, even when we're looking at a high frequency wine consumer, those are people that drink wine more often than once a week. Only 15% of that is wine only. Only 15% of those drinkers drink wine only. They are drinking beer sometimes, they are drinking spirits sometimes, they are drinking beer, wine, and spirits sometimes. So it's back to that, it's a battle for each occasion to have wine being a preferred choice. And people are making decisions, what suits their occasion, what suits the right pack size, what's the right serving size, what's the right price. And you got to think, I was just looking at, like, for a $20 bottle of wine, that's about $4 a serving. For a $20 bottle of spirits, that's about $1.20 a serving. And if you're looking at a White Claw or a Monaco cocktail, you're spending like $1 per serving. So there's, like, you're paying a premium for wine. I'd like to think, we can justify it to a certain extent, but every consumer is making their own decisions on that.
Yeah.
And I do think, Danny, what you hit it, that it's about winning occasions. Today's consumer is a beverage alcohol enthusiast. And I did a little cheating and looked in the question and answers down there. And if you, on the chart around spirits growing, wine growing, there were questions around, but what does it look like for premium or higher end? And while for wine the trends get better, the same is true for spirits, because what you see happening in the spirits category is the exact same thing, is that there is a move up in quality in the spirits category, especially when you think about something like tequila and the level to which the tequila category is showing extraordinary growth. And that growth is coming at the high end. So we're seeing that happen in the beer category. Just read, right, that imports, craft beer, right, those things. You still have this overall beverage alcohol enthusiast, and they're choosing what they're going to serve by occasion.
I know that we're going to have people that are going to complain about the fact we're talking too much about spirits and we're talking too much about, brand wine, if you will. The big side of it. We always have, talk about me, but we really are. Because we're all selling to the consumer. Heidi, can we pull up? Let's start with slide 30 if we can. And this is a slide that I think most people that have followed Silicon Valley Bank's work will recognize this. I have this going back quite a ways now, and we've been tracking this movement in the consumer for a while, and so this is again looking at the average winery. When you talk about who are they selling to, this is the answer that they give you. You know, I've wondered over time, you know, how accurate is this? Are people guessing? But you know, you have to track age because you got a serving issue, right? How old are you? And then, you know, we also can track that when people are buying online now too. They, you know, they're off of their age. It could be off. So I'm not saying this slide is perfect. It could be off, but it's an agreement with the other data that are out there. And you know what we see in this, of course, is the boomers trailing off. Now, I gotta pat myself on the back for one thing. It was probably, I'm going to say 6-7 years ago. Paul will back me up on this. I said in 2021 the Gen X would pass the boomers as being the, you know, the dominant cohort in wine sales. And so I missed it by that much. Let's call it a statistical tie. You know, where it sits now, and this is premium wine. Is what this really is. And so that's, you know, that's a good sign. But let's remember that Gen X consumer is a smaller cohort. And you know, then you look down at millennial, you see a little bit of growth in millennial. I think that the growth in the millennial and the drop in boomers had a little bit to do with COVID. I think the younger people were more willing to come out and you know, they wanted to get the heck out of the house and do something. And so I think the wineries benefited from that. Obviously, as we reopen, we start to have travel open. Some of that starts to fall away. People will get back on airplanes at some point, and even cruises. They'll get back and you know, look for that kind of travel. Other things to do. So that's a little bit of a tailwind we won't have this next year. But you know, this gets back to one of the things that the three of us were actually talking about last winter. I say the three, I mean Dale, Danny, and myself. We were, you know, we understand that that the beverage alcohol consumer consumes across categories now. That our competition, if you will, our co-laborers, let's put it that way, in the beverage alcohol business, are beer and spirits. And you know, we just have to be aware of that. And so I was kind of wondering, you know, how do we get at the notion of how much of this is top of mind? So, you know, it's like mind share. So I came up with the idea that, because I went to a party where there were a lot of younger people, and I noticed that what people were bringing, and it was RTDs, ready to drink, cans of things. It was some beer. It seemed like the nice beer got consumed pretty quickly. The more routine, if you will, beer didn't. It just sat in the iced bucket. And you know, some people brought, you know, really nice bottles of spirits that were expensive, and you know, and it's for gin and tonics or whatever you will. What's the hot one? Is it Manhattan's? Is that the one that's hot right now? Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, that cocktail culture is out there. And so, you know, you kind of saw that at this party. I was a little surprised to see just a few bottles of wine consumed. And it was, you know, stacked toward this other stuff. So I asked, you know, the three of us, we talked about this, and I asked a question to him. You know, what, if you were going to go to a party, what would you bring? And, you know, in my lifetime, a good hostess gift was, you know, if you were not told what to, you know, a dessert or whatever, you'd bring a bottle of wine. That's what was expected. Now I'm a boomer. That's my generation. I was curious what the rest of the generations might come up with. So Danny has a relationship with Harris Poll. And so through Danny's relationship there, and he was able to get them to run that poll. So if we can pull up slide 29, Heidi. So this is the result of that poll, And this was another point of alarm. So this is our consumer, whether you're selling in massive quantities or in thousands of cases, small quantities. This is our consumer. And when you look at what mind share do we have with the consumer, what Harris Poll came up with is that for my generation, basically, the 65 plus, even though I'm only 35, but for let's say for that generation, 50% of them said, we would bring wine. Well, that's the way I think. But look at 55 to 64. It's down to 30%. So a 20% drop. And we're talking about 50. If you haven't decided to make wine top of mind by the time you're 55, are you gonna change much the rest of your life? I don't think so. So this is another thing that we have coming that I think is important for us to understand and recognize, that 65-year-old person that is going to be 75 in 10 years. And that generation is sunsetting already. That older generation is sunsetting right now, hitting normal retirement age. The median boomer hit normal retirement age this last year. And so they're going to sunset as a dominant consumer, whether you're big, small, sell high, low. These are our consumers. And what we're left with now are consumers that treat alcohol beverage more equally. They don't put wine in a special category. That goes back to those circle slides where we could see that everybody's drinking across categories. And if I suspect if you put that by age, you might see something like this. Obviously, if this is done in that circle thing, the 65 plus is going to be obfuscated by the amount on the other side. So I think that's an issue to face.
Rob, can I ask a question on that?
Yeah, shoot.
I mean, isn't it true though, at this age, that the amount of choices we have to be an omni drinker is spectacularly larger than you had growing up? Spectacular. Every decade we have a cornucopia of new beverages to drink. I mean, spiked kombucha was never in existence in my thinking prior to this year, and the quality of all these things are interesting and adjusted. So that makes us the choice is really what gives us that change of behavior more than anything else, right?
I think there's a lot of things that drive consumer choice. And, why haven't the older generation moved away? They've had the same selection. So I think you really got to get back and say, why is there a difference? And there's a lot of reasons why this exists. Part of it's a health message. We don't put calories on our bottles, and that's part of health for a lot of people. They count calories. They want to know what they're drinking. They want to know what's in a bottle. And so, I personally advocate that we're more transparent, that we do put what the TTB has approved already: protein, fat, carbohydrate, and calories on the bottle. I think that's good for our industry to be more transparent about that. That's what those other consumers are looking for. So that's a component of it is health, but there's a lot of other ones too that we have to look at. Prices is one of them. Promotions is one of them. Why don't we go to, let me get a quick time check to see where we are. It's 10 after 10, so we got like 20 minutes. We have a lot of slides that will say, pretty much this over and over again. And so what I want to do is I want to spend just a few minutes talking about climate change and some of the things that rolled out from that, because we have some survey information to talk about. So I spent a couple of minutes just showing you some of that. And then I talked about, for those that pay attention to my blog and other places I speak, I've talked about an announcement. I want to get back to that in a second. So if we can, Heidi, let's
Rob,
go.
before you jump into those, we have two kind of thematic questions that have been coming in a lot. If you could maybe address those. One about low and no, the low no alc bev movement, and the other one is about supply chain. So I know Dale and Danny are very keen to understand both those. So the low and no, just the trend, is it going to be ongoing? Is it growing? Start there.
Yeah, it's growing. It's got a high growth rate, low base. But it's definitely growing. I think it's more difficult generally for wine to look at low alcohol. I think you can get lower, but I think it's generally difficult to produce something that tastes like wine as at a low alcohol point versus spirits as an example.
I mean, there's a whole suite of better for you, or however the consumer perceives that, characteristics that, to everyone's point, is growing fast on a low base, but is growing fast and given consumers increasing interest in health and wellness generally, I think that'll continue, especially if the product is good, or however the consumer perceives good.
I think the future is bright for those products. I think you're going to continue to see growth. You're going to continue to see technology grow, and Rob hit it there. Taste has to hit. You've got to match taste, and I think that we're seeing products come out now in the wine category that have that profile and are doing well within that. So I think that the future is bright for those.
And then supply chain. Let's go to slide 23 if we can. I'm sorry, slide 21. Yeah, 21. So on supply chain, we did ask this question in the so it's a good segue. We'll take a second on this. Ask people, how are they doing? What are they feeling right now? And you can see that 76% of the respondents said, glass has become a big issue. So it's everybody that's listening. This isn't a surprise. I think you probably would have gotten that. Not that many people are saying it's not an issue. That's a double negative. Sorry, but glass is a big deal. I mean, as I've talked to people, I have heard some saying, yeah, we're ordering into 2023 right now. So that normally is the kind of thing that creates a little bit of a bubble at a point. When everybody starts to order ahead because you're afraid of running out. So that's probably in the back somewhere. But yeah, the supply chain thing has been a problem, and it's backed into price. A slide that I didn't show, but it was the industry sentiment slide. It's in this deck that we're presenting.
I think you have slide 13, Rob, that shows people who say they're going to take price increase. Yeah,
exactly. That's where I was moving to. So let's move to slide 13. Good idea. I was going to say that. You can see here when we ask about price increase, again, this is premium producers. This is what they say. And last year, most producers are saying they're going to hold price. This year, 72% say they're going to increase price. But if you look at the bottom slide, most of those respondents also said it's a small increase, which is probably good overall. We've got to get through some of these inflationary pressures in the sentiment slide that I have, industry sentiment slide that I have. The largest issue is labor. And we all know it's not just paying labor, but that's something. I mean, people are making bonuses to have people show up on their crews. Wages are going up, and that has to go in. But going back to the supply chain, look at all corks, capsules, bottles, labels. Everything in the supply chain has gone up. And then let's not forget trucking. If you're selling through wholesale, you probably have a surcharge now on fuel that your wholesaler partner is giving to you. So all of that gets thrown into the mix, and that's that increases costs. It's I think almost impossible this next year to not look at trying to increase your cost. And so I think that's one of the places that we end up.
Rob, real quick on the supply
Please.
chain, I think it's just also important to point out that that's not unique to the wine industry. That's everything, right? That every consumer good is being impacted by that. So every company is facing those challenges. So it's going to be a struggle for a while. And if I had a crystal ball, I would tell you exactly what date it's gonna stop. But there's just no way for certainly for me to predict it. And I think just even for people who do this on a day in and day basis to study that, it's difficult for them to predict when that's going to happen. But it's going to be here for a while, I think.
Yeah. And to go back to slide 21, I think that we're overly optimistic in the amount of people we expect this to be resolved in the second half of 2022. It's congested for a while, I think, and to Dale's point, and it's congested across all industries. So
it's a creeping number, because if you see other business analysts right now, most of them are actually predicting at this point that that it'll be resolved in the second half of 2022. But I think as we get closer to the end of the first quarter, we'll probably have a lot of people say, oh, it'll be the third quarter of 2022. Just my own personal guess. I don't know. I don't have a lot of data to support it. I just know it's an issue, and it has to do as much with demand as it does with finding enough employees, at least in our marketplace. Let's move to slide 20, Heidi, if we can, just to get through some of these other data points. And there's a lot more in the report that you guys can all read, a lot more slides and discussion. I'm glad that you guys are going to be able to read it, and look forward to commentary and discussion about it. Like to create a conversation. I'm not always right, and I say it in the front of the report. But we do need to create a dialogue and find solutions to things. Here's one of the slides that talk about climate change, property insurance coverage. So the left side of this is about cost premiums, and the right side is about the coverage. So what this says is, if you go to the right side, 8%, kind of in the middle there, 8%, we couldn't get any insurance coverage. Now, I've worked more than 10 years in banking. I don't want to say how many years now, but I've worked, a decent amount of time in banking, and I've never run into the situation where I have a client that says, I can't get insurance. It's never happened. So, I'm not the only banker around that's trying to figure out how to adapt to that. What do you do? Another 27%, if you look right next to that, said they couldn't get sufficient coverage. So fully, if you 27 and 8, that's 35, I think. I can't do math in my head. 35, oh, it's up actually on the top, so I cheated. 35% couldn't get enough insurance, but look what happened to premium. Premium went up 71%, premium went up. So it's a real issue that is, part of the cost of climate change. And, part of the reason why, finding solutions to that is important. Let's go to slide 22 if we can, Heidi. Water, it's a big deal. Now, if you're watching from Oregon or Vancouver right now, you're probably not thinking it's as big a deal right now as maybe it did last October or something like that. In California, we've had a good run of rain. We're something like 170% of normal right now. So we're kind of doing okay, but we still need to have a significant amount of rain in order for us to actually get back to not being in a drought. We asked this question back in November. It was after we got, before we got any real rain, October, pardon me, before we got any real rain. And you can see that at that point, 43% of respondents were saying, yeah, there's potential for serious water shortage. Serious, it's like, we're really concerned about this. Very few, 2% said they had abundant water supply. So that does does include the Pacific Northwest, which has, had some actual flood problems of late. It's a real issue. I didn't get to talk about the supply side, how much is out there in terms of bulk and bottle, and what's happening to prices right now. But that impacts yields. We saw a second low harvest in a row in California, and actually most regions had a low harvest because soil moisture was just so thin. That's a scary thing when you're looking at, historic lows in reservoirs. The Hoover Dam, as an example, is at the lowest point it's been since they filled it. I don't know if that's right this second, but it was last time I looked. So these are issues that we have to face, and without rain, the rain that we've already had, I think this would be maybe top of the news. Heidi, if we can go to 23 now for a second. So we asked about what are you going to do? What are and there are some solutions that are out there. People that have been around for a while will remember when we didn't have drip irrigation. It was something that was figured out in Israel, which is quite prone to drought there, and they figured out drip irrigation, and it's kind of used all over the world now. The flood style that we used to do is gone. It's a wasteful way to handle your vines. There's much better ways, but today there's other things you can put. Little sensors inside vines. Look at your pressure that's going up into the vine. You can do overhead views. Look at infrared. See what parts of your vineyard are doing fine. Which parts are overwatered. You can start to cycle your watering in a different way. So there's a lot of technology that's out there, and what this is saying is a lot of people will be doing something. About a third will be doing something, and it's going to fall into technology. A lot of other things that can be done, and I think this is going to continue to be a larger thing that we'll have to talk about. I want to shift gears now and go to one more slide, and that is the last slide, slide 33. And while I leave that up, I mentioned an announcement. So when actually Dale, Danny, myself, Mary Jo Dale have been looking at what we see as long-term issues that have to be solved in our industry for sustainability and for growth. We would like to see a rising tide again for the industry. And it actually started with some of the things that I've been saying in the State of the Industry report. The trends that I was watching, and we go back 3 years ago, and I said to Mary Jo Dale, a friend of mine works, she's got Customer Vineyard, excuse me. I don't know if people are listening. And she said, well, let's get them together in a room. And I said, I don't think we can do that. How do you do that? And, and she did that. So she's been, kind of the stem winder in this. And Danny and I presented to some of the larger producers, the top executives in some of these companies. And the response was, yeah, we got a demand problem and we need to do something about it. So the announcement is that we've been trying to figure out how to start a USDA marketing order. We've gone through feasibility studies with UC Berkeley, raised money to do that. And what Haas School of Business, along with actually oversight from McKinsey. And their response was, you should look at a research and promotions orders, R&P. So we have been working down that path. It's going to cost about $2 million just to apply. To get through the application phase. It costs $100,000 just to apply. We've raised right now about $650,000 from industry supporters. right now. And so we still have a little ways to go in there, but we have enough to start this process of application. There's a lot that has to be done to get from here. It's not even a company yet, but we're calling it Wine Ramp, and you can go online. It's wineramp.org. And I'd appreciate if you did that when you went online and signed up so that you can keep track of progress. Now, when we say that we're going to try to do this, this is the four of us have been doing this as volunteers. We're trying to figure out how to help the industry and do something that's good and helpful. This has to now be taken over by the industry, and it needs to be a paid thing. So part of this money is going to have to go toward having somebody that's focusing on it all the time. Part of it's going to be, there's all sorts of costs, legal costs and such that go with trying to start up any of this kind of a thing. So, that's where that money is going to go. And the next step for us is to engage with everybody now and try to get what everybody's feelings are about this. And B, we're, to put an industry board in place that can start to make decisions about, what the USDA marketing order might look like, what kind of assessments, how do you, do those assessments, what's the formula for it? And so there's a long way to go, and it's not a thing yet. I go back 2 years ago, I'd say there's a 1% chance, but I'd say it's 50-50 now. So there's a lot between here and let's call it 2 years from now before we see it. But this last slide is just one indication of the issue that we see. Danny, why don't you explain this slide? Because this is one you came up with.
Yeah, this is from some published data from a couple different sources, but it's the average annual industry spending on the part of suppliers in the industry. So wine, an average of $90 million a year versus beer at 1.4 billion per year versus spirits at around $500 million a year. And by the way, about 40% of the 90 million for wine is print. And it's much lower in the other industries. So there's not a lot of industry spending to the consumer that's going on right now on the part of the wine industry, which is part of the issue. And we've talked about some of the other issues, which increasingly include how do we engage younger legal drinking age consumers to love wine, and that's an issue that we continue to try to address.
Yeah, and where this ends up, you can use whatever example you want. Got milk, the incredible edible egg. There's all sorts of a list of these kind of orders and what they've done on the marketing side. But we know, as I think Danny mentioned, that wine per serving is more expensive than beer spirits. That's one of the facts. So a consumer is going to put value on things, and value is, it's not just about price. It's about what that does. And so marketing is, I think, one of Paul's questions earlier, is it just about the diversity of spirits and beverage choices that are out there? And the answer is no, it's not just about that. It's about a lot of things. And one of the things that you can do to increase value with the consumer is do marketing, and make wine cool, make wine, if you're going to choose to drink, then, why not wine is the point we're trying to make. We don't want to compete with beer and spirits producers. That's not really the idea here. But we want to put forward our best foot, and we want consumers to see that wine is a good choice. And if they do look at wine as being a cool thing, they put more value to it. And even though it's more expensive, they're more willing to pay. We have plenty of data that support this, and so you can go online to wineramp.org and download some of the documents that we've been looking at. There'll be a lot more discussion on this. It's going to move very slowly as we get feedback from across the industry. And as I said, there's no guarantee of success, but we think that this is the right time for the industry to unite come together and find solutions for what I think are quite obvious problems. And as my my colleagues here, my other three colleagues that are in the business for a very long time and do analytics for a living, they all see the same thing. So that's the announcement. And the other announcement is we're out of time. So I'd like to thank the Dean of Data, the Doctor of Digital, and the Master of whatever Dale is. I couldn't come up with a name at the right time. But closing comments. As a reminder, you can access the 2022 State of the Wine Industry Report on our website at www.svb.com. A replay of this is going to be available on our website, and also it's going to be shared to the attendees and registrants this coming Monday, January 24th. If you're interested in receiving complete set of charts, use this. We'll talk to you, but we're not going to take the charts that we've done in the past. We've been very open about giving those away. We're not giving those fully away this time. We want to make sure that those that are participating in the surveys are getting the benefit. So the slide deck that we just presented is not going to go, you're not going to be able to download that this year. We want to just give this to the survey participants, as well as the deck of slides for survey participants was almost 100 slides this year. So a lot of data to look up on that. Interesting times we're in. We're making a lot of progress as an industry. I'd like to see our industry come together and find joint solutions to these problems, and hopefully this is going to be the beginning of that conversation. And we'll just have to see. But with that, I think we're out of time, and I would like to thank everybody from around the world that's watched this, and look forward to the discussion that's going to flow from all of these comments. With that, we'll wish you all a good day, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. We hope to see you soon at Silicon Valley Bank. Thank you.